Bonjiva Cordia. Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat where I'm in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Obates and Druids. And as is customary, I will start with a prayer for peace. Gomara Shiakon of Fudna Crinne. Gomara Shiakon in our Jili agus in our Jirha. Gunairi Lynn, Lenokridge Garmaka. Gamwich Boykus Jeev. Jehudaka, a spirit Gudaka. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities, for peace. As the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all those who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. That those who make riches from violence and war might hear in their hearts and dreams the cries of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lamb. That our swords be beaten into plowshares, and no hurt or harm be done anywhere along the Holy Mountain, with thanks to John O'Donoghue. So let me see where you're all from. John from Scotland, Pat from Ulster, 38 from unseasonably warm South London, look at you. And then Julia from very mild London. Lillian is in Sweden, Southwest Wales, Westmeath from New York. We've got Madrid, and we have Wales, Wyoming, lovely to see you all, snowy Idaho, British Columbia, beautiful, drizzly Madrid, low lingering clouds in Colorado. So it's just lovely to see you all and welcome back. And Eliza from Vermont, sunny, cold Pacific, Northwest USA, frozen Calgary, okay. Bristol, New Orleans, Wexford, sunny Somerset, rainy Somerset, sorry, the Netherlands. So it's lovely to see you all. And Glastonbury, wonderful. So this evening, my guest is Irish. So we're going to Wexford. And let me introduce you to Michael Wall. Michael, it's so lovely to have you here this evening.
It's really very nice to be here with you, Eimear, and thanks for the invitation to join you.
Not at all. Now, I know you're in Wexford, but judging by your accent, you ain't from Wexford. So tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from originally.
Okay, well, I'm glad you spotted my accent all right, but no, I'm a long time down here in Wexford, and originally I'd be from the city, from Dublin. That would have been my birthplace. And a long number of years down here in the southeast of Ireland.
So what brought you down here?
Well, mainly brought down here from the point of view of work. I mean, Ireland isn't that big of a country, but it's a beautiful place where we live. We live here on a little half-acre plot of land here in Wexford. Wexford is a really interesting county because it's bordered on, it's kind of like a triangle. It's in the tail of Ireland and bordered on two sides by the sea. And a good fine day, we can see the coast of Wales. And diagonally across the western side, from the tip to the bottom of that triangle, are the Blackstairs Mountains. We do call them mountains, even though people might smile that they're really not mountains, but they are mountains. The actual Blackstairs Mountains was where the last Irish wolf met its end. So it's a beautiful range of mountains. So we're between the mountains and the sea, which is a great great place for a druid to be, I think, between the mountains and the sea. And the mountain range is a very beautiful range because it will have great connections with the fires of the winter and the fire festivals. The fires would have been lit across the top of the mountains and would, back into Christian times, then have had connections, Christian connections too as well. And it also would have been a part of the country where one of the great 5 roads of Tara would have come down to the southeast of the country. So a lovely place to be, and we're in an agricultural area here, which is very, very rural, but not too isolated.
Interesting. Do people still light fires, or they signal fires around your area?
Well, in ancient times, they were, after the fires were first lit on Tara, they would have moved down and up and out, as we know, and they would have come down this way, down from Tara down to the south and southeast of Ireland, across that mountain range. But the lighting of fires, not so much, but there would be very strong Christian festivals still attached to Lunasa, and that would be still to this day celebrated on the last Sunday of July, and that would still be. It's sometimes referred to as Frockin Sunday, because Frockins, as Irish people know, are berries. I think they're bilberries. Not sure what the other name is, but we all call them Frockins anyway. But bilberries, yeah, okay. And that's a wonderful time because the whole mountain is covered in bilberries. Anyone that hasn't ate them, they are lovely. Particularly if you're out walking, you can just walk along eating them. They're really, really addictive in terms of eating them. So yeah, that was going to transfer from the fire festivals to the change in Christian times. But there would be quite a substantial amount of megalithic art, rock art and stone along the range, in terms of them being portal tombs, a number of them, and dolmen structures right along. So between that and rock art along, it's a beauty. It's a fascinating area to walk in and to look at and be part of.
I just wonder, because I don't know Wexford particularly well. I have friends, who have kind of go there by the sea, but not the Blackstairs. I haven't been there. And it's fascinating that you talk about Frockin Sunday, and that Frockin Sunday goes all around Ireland. But it's interesting. So the last Sunday of July is the traditional time for people to make the pilgrimage up Croagh Patrick. And I don't know if Patrick ever actually arrived there and ever went down that mountain. This is for our viewers just outside Westport in County Mayo. And people make a pilgrimage on the last Sunday of July. And traditionally people walked on their bare feet. I've done it myself, not on the last July, and I was properly shod, I'll have you know. But according to the legend, he had a big battle with, was it Crumdove or Crumcroch, who was the pagan god at the time. And of course, St. Patrick won. That's always the story. So it's interesting. You have that as well on the other side of the country.
Yes, it's interesting, the traditions, and I suppose in many ways here in Ireland, you don't have to scratch the surface of Christianity too much to find the old beliefs and old religion underneath. It wasn't quite destroyed physically as it was elsewhere. So you don't have to go too far to find it. The same would be in terms of our wells, of which there are many, many wells around here, as there are all over Ireland. So they would be preserved. They have a temporary other name perhaps labelled on them, but they're wells and entrances to the underworld portals. So we know them when we go there. We don't have to say any more. So whoever goes there, everyone is welcome anyhow, and it's lovely to be there at those as well.
That's brilliant. Well, you're making me curious now about exploring the Black Stairs. You know, the reason I was asking you about the fires, because Dave the Bard, as you know, our Pendragon, he, with his Anderida Grove, worked out, so they serve, so they have their Anderida Grove and they do their ceremonies at the Long Man of Wilmington,
Yes.
Sussex. This is the guy with the two staffs on the mountainside. So they looked, and I can't remember where the midpoint is. I don't know if the Long Man is the midpoint, but they divided into 7 groups, and they went and lit fires in key places to see if they each could see each other, and they did. That to me is magic, and I'd love to try that here. And I'm just that you talk about the fires. I've often thought about doing it in Kilkenny and around Kilkenny. I know there'd be 2 points where I could see it, but it's defined as at Mount Leinster, Mount Brandon, Freestone Hill, Rathbay, a few others. And I don't know if you've any.
Well, that's very interesting. First of all, the only issue with the fires, obviously, we have to be very careful because there's a lot of forestry on the Black Stairs Mountains, and there tends to be difficulties here during the summer in terms of forest fires, so we have to be a little bit careful with it. But we could use other lamps. But it's interesting to point about the visibility of the fires, because certainly one of the really fascinating aspects of the mountains are the placements of the various stone monuments, and it's fascinating to see the alignments. And there is absolutely no doubt, and we all know in other more internationally known parts of the country, like up at Newgrange and the Boyne Valley and Loughcrew, they have been well identified and worked on by many people over the years. But here on the Black Stairs, even though there would be perhaps only a smaller number of us with an interest in it, we certainly have identified very clear line connections across the countryside from the placement of monuments and other points. I think they normally say if you can find 3 things happening in geography, it's not a coincidence. 2, it may not be, but 3, it's definitely not. So when you get a complete alignment, maybe over 50 or 60 kilometers, it's very unusual. And sometimes you get parallel lines of major stone placements. And these are fascinating. And then obviously linked to Imbolg, linked to Samhain, or linked to the equinox or solstice. So it's a very fascinating subject, but it's lovely to be at one of those places at the correct time. But it takes an awful lot of years to get all those kind of things to line up and get the weather here in Ireland to see a sunrise on an exact day. But it is fantastic when that happens.
It does. I go to Knockrow, which is in South Kilkenny, and with
Yes.
2 passages in the line to the winter solstice. 3 times I've seen the sunrise going, in a maybe over 15 years. Once I saw the sunset, and last year I saw both sunrise and sunset. So
it's so magical.
It does. It's so exciting, and it's interesting how our ancestors, how they managed to sort this out. Well, either the weather was much better at the time. I've no idea that they could.
Absolutely, it is such a wondrous thing to experience when that happens, Eimear. I mean, when you're there, particularly at a sunrise, particularly when you're there on one of those mornings and everything just goes right, and the sun comes up spot on the mark of where it's meant to be. It's just astonishing. So a great experience. Everyone should try it. And there's loads of them there, so they're well worth getting up early in the morning for.
Well, certainly the winter solstice isn't so hard, you know. The,
No, that's the lazy druids one. Yeah.
so, so you've got your own grove, Cuchullin's Belt. So where do you where do you have your when you meet? Do you have your ceremonies in a particular site, or do you move around, or what do you do, or do you have it in the garden, like on your patch
Yes,
of land?
we meet here where we are here in this location, and we have a little grove down the bottom of our half acre, and that's where we are. We're
I think you have
virtually
frozen on
always
me.
there,
I don't know if you can
unless
hear me.
unless the weather
Uh,
is atrocious.
so you can come back to me. I don't know if
I
I
can
have
hear you. I
frozen
can hear you
or.
fine. Yeah.
Uh, so I know a number of people are commenting on. There was Sisbury Hill was the centre point of those 7 points of alignment or points of connection. And then, Mimi, I agree with you. It must have taken years of observation to get the monuments just right. Perhaps they were wood before they were stone. Perhaps, yeah. I mean, it takes. Hi, everybody. We're back. Sorry about that. Okay, we're back. Apologies for that signal. So
Okay.
I don't know where you left. Anyway,
We were talking about the mountains and the rock art, so and the alignments. So yeah.
So just wonderful. So yeah, I was asking. Yeah, you were talking about your own grove where you
Yes, so we work here, and we'd meet on the festivals on the wheel of the year. So we'd meet up here, and we do our ceremonies and rituals here. So we'd see that as being our major tasks. We also try to look experimentally on any kind of magical work that we can be involved in, and we done a lot of work in the last, mainly over the period just after COVID, in working on the old mythology and legends, and in terms of trying to engage with the ancient gods of the land, the gods and goddesses of the land. And I suppose that was a very good experience. And we've also done a lot of work in trying to explore the activity which was done by Yeats and Maud Gonne during the 1920s. So we have tried to have a look at the magical work that they done, and have done a fair amount of research on that material, which one of the good things about people who write things down is it then becomes available. It's not exactly at hand to get, but it's available and gettable, and it's quite a fascinating activity. So we do that alongside our own work. So it's a very, very interesting to do that and try to take up where they left off and some of their experiences. But they're very well documented, and we're very grateful that they left that kind of material behind them. So it's a fascinating area to explore as to what they were engaged in at that time. People like, as I say, Yeats, Maud Gonne, people like John Sharp and others across UK, Ireland, and elsewhere in Europe as well. And people like Ella Young and others who subsequently wound up in the US and with their activities there. So it's important, I think, to try to make sure that lineage doesn't disappear. And only in recent times you see people like A.E. Russell and another real an amazing mystic who wrote an incredible amount of material, and all virtually disappeared. So I was delighted to be involved and to be at the first meeting of the A.E. Russell Society, which was formed last year, and that's a great contribution to ensuring his work, and not only his work, but his written work and his artwork. Anyone who's not seen the paintings done by A.E. Russell, they're just something to, if you've any interest whatsoever in esoteric matters or the magical world, they are just incredible. And no one even knows how many he produced, but I would absolutely reckon it's a minimum of hundreds, if not more. And he certainly gave them around freely, but they are amazing to see. And you will come across them dotted in places, hanging quite loosely in places. You see them. Anyone who goes on a tour of Huntington Castle, you'll just see them hanging in the kitchen, or up in Lissadell House, where you just see them hanging on the wall, and you say, "Wow, that's a painting by A.E. Russell." So amazing work and material, understudied, I'd say, and there's not an awful lot collectively written about that period in terms of Ireland. But there are people now far more interested in joining those dots, and recently the marvelous history produced of Ella Young, only produced last year, I think the early part of last year, an amazing book of her life, and these are well worth seeing and reading for all people interested in any kind of spiritual path, and for the people who are involved in Ireland here in activity in terms of esoteric thinking in the 20s.
Yeah, and Pat says Armagh County Museum holds a fair few of his original writings and sketches, and are happy to make an appointment for viewing. So,
well, he being from Lorgan, there is a very, very active group of A.E. Russell enthusiasts up in Lorgan, and indeed they were the springboard who initiated the National Society. So that's really important, and that they are working on even trying to identify what he done and to properly put into some kind of chronological order his material, and indeed to start trying to republish his work. His major work, Descent of the Gods, was actually only republished last year after being out of print for many decades. And that's what tends to happen. These things go into abeyance. Unlike more prominent people like Yeats, for example, but there are plenty of others who have amazing writing. Ella Young's material is quite difficult to get, but I understand that there is activity going on to get her works published, both her children's
her Wonder Tales, those ones, yeah.
Her children's books are beautiful, really beautiful. But she was an amazing woman. But her book Flowering Dawn, and her own book of her own life is quite amazing, written in her own way. But she was quite an amazing woman. Most of them would have been involved in some fashion or other in the Theosophical Society. But that would have been loosely where they would have had activities involved there. But a couple of years ago then, in the place where they used to meet in the middle of Dublin City, someone was redecorating, and they were taking down some of the wallpaper, and they found there was a room there, and the room there was actually, with the whole room had paintings on the walls, clearly done by A.E. and Jack B. Yeats, which was effectively a temple. Now they did the National Art Gallery were able to remove them from the wall, and they are preserved, but they're not on display. But they are preserved and there, which is a good thing. But they're fascinating. They're fascinating images, which I've seen some of the images. They're amazing.
So, I mean, that's fascinating. So the paintings were papered over. Wow.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, it's fascinating. Albie Bruce, who was a Fireside guest some weeks back, he says Yeats himself described A.E. as the one poet of modern Ireland who has moulded a spiritual ecstasy into verse, the most delicate and subtle poetry that any Irishman of our time has written. That's a lovely tribute.
Absolutely, and I suppose the relationship between A.E. and Yeats can be bordering on the humorous at times. But I suppose I'd see, like a lot of other people, I mean, A.E. was definitely the mystic, Yeats perhaps the magician. As they say, the magician does and the mystic is. But it was a bit like that. But it is certainly his A.E.'s writings are I find them anyway quite easy to read. Unlike Yeats, you'd certainly need some kind of a prize for reading a vision, for sure. It's a bit like Ulysses, but I mean it's a tough read. But A.E. was, and he was a man of so many parts. His activity, his I suppose what and saying he was a mystic is a bit unfair to him, because mystics tend to be aloof from society. That couldn't be further from the case with A.E. Russell, who effectively traipsed around every part of this country, setting up, trying to establish the cooperative movement, speaking in nearly every town hall in the country. So he was very much unmystical in that way, that he was very practical and saw the role of the small society. He saw the role of building an economy connected with the people. And that's it should be interesting for us today, not to mention 100 years ago.
Yeah, this is what Pat writes. A consciously wrote for the working man to understand him, stemmed from his work with the co-op. She also said that every time Mary Poppins is on the telly, she says, I grin and remember that the author PJ Travers was an esoteric writer and protege of AE. So these connections are, AE and Druidry, AE and Mary Poppins, these wonderful links.
Yeah, and I think one of the things, sometimes when you watch one of these movies, these crime movies or something, and you see the police doing these things up on a big board on the wall where they have a line connecting all the dots. This is so necessary in the history of our world, because there are so many people you think are unconnected, but when you actually begin to see who they were teaming up with. I remember when I was an awful lot younger, I had a great interest in photography. Long since gone now, because I wouldn't be. I was more interested in the chemistry of it than anything else. But now it's too easy. But when I was reading Ella Young's life and following through some of her work, and when she went to live in the US, she referenced in her work there, because one of my great photographic heroes was a man called Ansel Adams. Yes. And anyone who knows anything about photography knows that he's just a giant of that work. And here I saw his name mentioned, and he was involved in the esoteric movements in the US at the time, something I didn't know, and quite amazing. And that was a connection that I would have had many years ago to him as a photographer. So it's interesting how things kind of crop up as a connection when you're following one kind of thread, that it pops up and there's somebody else, and maybe 25 years apart, something makes more sense. Why was I particularly interested in him back when I was much younger? So it's interesting.
I was in Howard and I were in Yosemite National Park 26 years ago.
Oh, yeah, that's where he done a lot of stuff. Yeah,
and that's where I discovered Ansel Adams. So just interesting, these beautiful black and white photographs. So just interesting that I'm not a photographer apart from one with a phone, but it's nice to know. I know that name. I've seen his work. That's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. He was his images of nature and of the canyons is just marvelous. But his depth of feeling for nature comes straight out in those photographs. Were just extraordinary, and I never knew he had that other dimension to him. So it certainly made more sense to me then how he could create on paper the feeling of the land in that way, and you just can see it. You can see it coming out of those prints.
Beautiful. So now, speaking of, you've left the art of photography, but you engage in the art of poetry. Would you like to share some of your poetry? Because I know you're published in Touchstone. So would you like to share some of your? I know people would like to hear some of your poetry.
Well, thanks, Eimear. I've never done this. I have certainly. This is a forced. So it's a
encouraged. I'd reframe that.
Okay, thanks, Eimear. Well, I just say something about this. This we were talking earlier about the mountains and about the rock art. There was a particular piece of rock art that I had been looking for, because there was rumors of this piece of rock art, and I was looking for it for about 2 years here on the Black Stairs Mountains. That just could have been my very poor navigation in terms of where it was. But I found them one day, and when I came home after seeing this rock art, which is really in a very, very isolated area, right under the highest mountain, Mount Leinster, which is there, a very, very wild place. I wrote this poem about it, so I hope you enjoy it. What did they see, those ancient ones? What were they thinking of as they gazed at the sky? What message were they trying to send through time? Was there joy in their hearts as they carved? The hands that pecked on cold wet stone were hands that laboured hard. But never did the daily toiler forget that cups and rings were magical things. The eyes brought light from within the heart that saw in sparkling stars and rolling moons the never-ending joy that imagination brings, for the spirit free feeds the soul. With their trails and ladders, wheels and stars, these ancient ones embraced each stone. In quiet places beneath the sky, their sparkling minds sent out their call. On entrance chambers and pillars tall, on mountain passes and valleys wide, on hilltops and rivers deep, they saw, they gazed, and carved their message across time.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, because when you mentioned rock art, I was wondering, were they painted like you have in Africa, or were they carved? So you're saying they're carved.
Yeah, they were carved, and people know what I mean. Cups and rings is going to determine the circles, and the bit in the middle is like a kind of like a thumbprint. So you have the circles going in, and then the one in the middle. But certainly the feeling of being able to put your fingers onto these on a mountainside is amazing. You can feel. I certainly could feel that connection back across time. I mean, I was there on my own, windswept kind of day, but you could feel this going through time. And like, these people weren't that bored that they were doing this as a doodle, that they just had nothing better to be doing. This took a lot of work. So it gave me this idea of the message through time. It was like time travel, sending this message out to connect, as if you were connecting with another planet. So it's quite wonderful when you see it, and get the opportunity to see it in its real location, not in a museum.
Yes. Oh, I'd love to go. Maybe you'll show me someday. It's just absolutely amazing. Great reaction to your poem. An absolutely beautiful poem. Wonderful. Wow. An amazing poem. I love the cups and ring markings. That's beautiful. Love the ring. It's enigmatic. That reverberates in my heart. Really beautiful words. That's spectacular. The power of inspired utterance. Thank you, sir. Absolutely. The rock art is so alive, especially those in Ireland. They echo to us. And I think it is, you're right, that notion of being able to put your hand where that hand was. Thank you, Gabriella. Maybe they did it because someone encouraged them rather than enforced them.
Let's hope so. There's a very famous poem, which I don't have, by Bertolt Brecht, about the building of the pyramids. So they weren't built in such nice conditions.
I wouldn't have thought so. I'd say less encouragement and more enforcement.
Yeah, definitely.
That is brilliant. So I know you trained as a graphic artist and you're retired now, and it's how you. There was photography, graphic art. Actually, Karen says, can they ever imagine that we would be marveling at their carvings and writing poetry thousands of years in the future? I mean, that's a really interesting question. We don't know what impact our actions have today on the future. Well, at the moment, there's lots of anxiety about the negative impact, but it's just interesting.
Well, Yeah, I think sometimes as human beings, we consider, we just have this sense of over importance. Now, the modern humanity has just this sense of over importance of how important we are, and perhaps how unimportant our ancestors way back were. Um, we more knew our place back then than we do now. So that's what's more sad. Whatever is happening now, it's not that important because
Well, I
we're not.
suppose I was thinking of not so much the wonderful things we leave, but the damage, that
Yeah,
what kind of a
absolutely.
legacy we leave for our descendants. But it is fascinating how, like, the person who plants the tree never sits in within its shade. And the person who plants the tree does so knowing that, and knowing that that is not important, that somebody else down the line, all going well, will sit beneath that tree. And thinking doing things for the future without a vested interest, I think is so, so important. And I suppose as Druids, that's what we try to do. We sound like we're very noble, but that, holding ceremony, creating energy in a place, making links, checking, all of that.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think it's so true. I think because it's both the material. I mean, the material that the ancients worked on, the length of time it took them to do it, they were definitely leaving it for future generations as a continuum. And like we spoke about AE and Yates and all the rest, they didn't record all this information because they weren't going to the kind of material that would be popularist or that would be mass produced, but they recorded this material as a contribution to 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 to, to thinking going forward, and there to be discovered. And when you look at all those type of alignments going back so many millennia, they clearly were built in perhaps half a lifetime of people of the time. Perhaps was half their lifetime building them. So
yeah,
they definitely weren't building them to like building them as we build a comfortable house to live in for the rest of your life. I mean, that wasn't the reason. So it's important, I think, that we go back and feel what was there, what was the canvas they looked up at. And I mean, their internet was the sky. The sky was there. That was their screen. So day, every day, sunrise to sunset, they were looking at the sky.
that's
Um,
right.
so
And
that's where everything was.
and Albie says the way you wrote suggested that magic and wonder was so deeply woven into ancient people's lives and never separate. And I think that's a very important one to hold on to. There's a lot of response here. Eric wants to know, do you know if the pictographs where you live were for vision quests or marker stones? I mean, we don't know, but do you have a view on that?
Well, it's an never ending study, but certainly where I've tried to find natural alignments. The answer, in my opinion, the answer to all these things is in the sky, because there wasn't anything else. That's where they looked. Everything was in the sky. So whether or not you talk about the pyramids and the connection between the pyramids and Orion's belt here in Ireland, many of our alignments are to the solstice or to some of the celestial um, planets or star combinations. And when you see the celestial movement around around the year, and I think it's one of the great studies of Druidism is the study of time.
Yeah.
And I think the key of learning in Druidism is that study of time, and to realize what it is, what it means, and that it's certainly not a watch or a calendar as we know it. We have to go back and rediscover what time meant. It's not a line. Like now everyone talks about a timeline. It's not a line at all. It's like thinking in 2 dimensions as instead of 3. So we have to put time into a 3-dimensional thing, and then we might begin to grasp what time means and where everything has a place in the universe. Everything has its place. Nothing more superior than another.
That's right. Linda says, I think there are many messages and signs left as guidelines for us if we can only interpret them. Perhaps we made them for our future selves. And it's really interesting because when you're talking about time not being linear, who knows? Who knows? And then Owen says, as we look back, I wonder did they, and I think they did, look forward where their hands were, ours are. And in the future, those that come after us will be, linking through the ages. We've lost a lot along the way, but we have gained too in many ways. And some of what we newly carry in all its complications, we haven't even begun to realize we are the ancients yet to be. Maybe the links remain strong. Who knows?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
It's just beautiful. It's great to have just a lot of response to this. And then Philippa says, the way the ancients, our ancestors left us their emotional connection across to us. And that is lovely. And I think when you are, the awe that one feels at a place like this, and you think of what awe went into the creation of that, somebody expressing their sense of awe with the sky, the landscape, and marking that onto stone. And then we too experience that.
Well, it certainly, there's a very interesting book just published last year by the Royal Irish Academy on death and dying in ancient or in prehistoric Ireland. And it was a very fascinating view that was taken in the book that, we say, well, there was nothing left in writing by the ancients, and of course that's not quite true, because they left enough carved stones around, But the view in the book was that the one thing the ancients did leave behind was how they buried people.
Yes.
So this was fascinating because, this thing about everyone looks in the wrong direction when they're looking for something. You always make the mistake of looking in the wrong place. So he argued that, look, it's not just the monuments, but what did they do with their dead? Because they did bury them, they did keep them, they did bury them. And it's it's absolutely fascinating to look over this history of 10,000 years of how the patterns of what society changed and how they saw their dead absolutely as their ancestors. It wasn't a question of whether there were deities. It was the reverence of them as their ancestors and placing them in. I mean, they would. There's a lot of evidence in it that they would, if they burnt them or if they left their bones out to be taken by animals, they always came back. They came back to take part of them to keep with them. So there was that connection with their ancestors, which was very, very deep from the most ancient times. And that's important because there's a huge message in that what someone put in there on the screen, Eimear, like that when people said perhaps about the future, that they were absolutely thinking about the future and also thinking about the past. But the reverence of the ancestors was vital, not so much to them, but to future generations. They weren't just holding on to this skull or a bone for them. And it was nothing that's evident anyway about a deity connection, but it was also to pass on to the future. So that's another interesting aspect to it.
That's just wonderful. So, how did you find but all this interesting background. How did you find Druidry and how did you find Obot?
Wow, there's a question. Did anyone have an easy journey into this? But or a quick one. I suppose I was always I always had an interest in spirituality, and I'm saying this retrospectively because I couldn't pronounce the word when I was a kid, so I wouldn't have known anything about spirituality. But retrospectively, looking back on my younger self, I definitely had a very strong interest in spirituality. I would come from a Christian Catholic background, and that would have been my background where I was born into a city, inner city location, and didn't come from in any way a religious home, which was a bit strange in 1950s Ireland, but wouldn't have been religious. But I had definitely developed a strong spiritual interest in things. Probably as I got a little bit older into my teens, would have looked to the east. I think we all did, maybe at that age, but there was a little bit of an interest in Eastern mysticism. Back then, it wasn't that easy to get material. There was no internet. Most of the people on here mightn't remember that, but there was no internet, so you kind of picked up what you could, and it wasn't a very free publication system we lived in. Even that type of material wouldn't have been easily available, and that would have been a big interest to me. I suppose I would have moved away from Christianity when I began to see what was going on. But my earlier interest in Christianity really would have been when I saw Christianity as a changing type of religion, that it done things to improve the lot of people. I would have been very interested in the revolutionary priests of South America. And when I realised that certainly wasn't going to happen anywhere else, and it was quickly put down there too, I would have lost a bit of interest there. But in later years, I was lucky enough, quite accidentally, while reading books, as I continued to do in terms of spiritual thinking, to come across a book called "A Witch Alone," written by a woman called Marion Green. And that certainly was a major change for me. I do remember after I finished that book, writing to the author, thinking I'd never hear from them again, and lo and behold, I got a letter back from Marion, and I studied under Marion for a good few years. Marion, an absolutely wonderful woman, would refuse now to allow me to say she was my teacher any longer, but I still would consider her. But she is a great friend. And strangely enough, I mean, I would only have seen Druidism because even at that point, I certainly wouldn't have thought Druidism was alive. And of course, I did find it was alive. And like so many others, when I got the first brown envelope in the door from my bardic grade, I know it's a bit of a cliche. People say it's like coming home, but it was. There's no doubt. I think so many people you meet, and then of course when you go to the first gathering of other Obot people, you just realise that there's something strange about us. You know, that there's just such an amazing connection each morning and each evening when I give recognition to our lives. I feel that presence of Druids and Druid ancestry, both past, present, and future, friends and others that I never know. But you feel that. And that's a great feeling. So it was a kind of a very circular coming home, but certainly I've never found anything in my Christian childhood that I've any problem with, other than the church. But I've certainly never found any great problem with Christians, with the spirituality of it,
Yeah.
in terms of that ever created any big hang up. Nor do I look back with any regrets. But an awful lot of what I thought was in Christianity is very much in my pagan life and in my Druid life.
So how did you find Obod?
Well, I suppose in my studies with Marion, I would have discovered that there were druids, real ones, still alive, unlike the dead ones that I thought were the only ones left. And just looking around, but I mean, Obod came up, and obviously being in Ireland, it wouldn't have been the first one I would have looked at, but I certainly would have bumped into. I would have seen druids in this place, Stanton Drew, where I used to go over when I was working with Marion. So all of a sudden, you'd be out there and see these people like Ron Hutton and others, and you say, "Wow, these are strange people." So I would have. That's where I would have come across it, and that was the introduction. So it was accidental in a way, but it was definitely accidental in discovering that there were real druids still alive. That was. It may not be the case in the UK, but it was certainly the case for me.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, I would have said I found my home in Obod. I mean, cliches are true, though, aren't they? But the brown envelope. Firstly, in Ireland, when you mention the brown envelope, it implies a bribe for some nefarious reason. But the brown envelopes of the order, it was that excitement every month getting them, seeing it, coming through the letterbox, and the excitement of opening it and reading it. I still remember it. It's there, and I don't know how many years ago. I mean, so 20 years ago I joined, and I still remember each time for each of the grades, just feeling that what's in it this month. Just that excitement. So it's just lovely to have that. And I mean, there are people I see in comments worrying about, because everything is digital and someplace in the ether, that will we as ancestors leave any monuments or any evidence or gems or to the future? And who knows? I mean, having actual tangible evidence of things, like receipts, for example. If you go to, it was just before COVID, Sinead McCool, she's an historian, and she was looking at women in Irish politics for 31 years. And she'd been asking people, families of the women politicians, do you have any memorabilia? Others, a lot didn't. And I remember my sister's friend, her mother was a TD, and they had kept everything. But things like receipts or, account books give you an idea of what something cost at the time, or a letter of invitation or a program. Those things that you think, oh my God, they're going to keep this is rubbish now. It's just filling up. I mean, my house becoming a paper landfill type thing. And yet, all of these tangible things are really, really important. Like you say, putting your hand, into the cup mark, or carving the lozenge with your finger, or the spiral, or whatever it is. And that's something so tangible. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose which way and how we show what way we are connected over time, that will change, and obviously so much has changed. But I think if we can get that feeling of connection from one stone left by one very small group of people, I certainly think we can leave enough of what we are, because the saddest part of that kind of conversation is, what will we leave that has a connection to the land?
Yeah.
That's the point. There may be loads of things connected to other things,
Yeah.
and but what will be left that connects us to the stars, to the planets, to the land itself, and that connection into the land, and our connection to it. Because I suppose so many people try to say, well, all that's irrelevant now because it's not important anymore. But I do think that there's such a searching for the emptiness of what is left, in terms of what modern materialism has created. And that searching is wonderful, because the searching is no different. It might be a bit more, there might be a bit more white noise around for you to get through it. But it's there. And when they find it, it's a very strong thing that they feel. So I think our people will leave marks behind them. I think that will happen.
And when you look at the ancient monuments, I think of Knockrow, it's 3,500 years old, but different peoples use them over the millennia for different things. And now we're there. And
absolutely.
So in 2,000 years' time, they'll find evidence that, well, people in the 21st century also attended these things. They may not have left ashes, or they may not have burnt fires, but from whatever has been left behind, our footprints and whatever else, they'll find pollen, they'll find evidence of DNA, that kind of stuff. And they'll know, actually, this has a long lineage of usage. Okay, maybe for 1,000 years they were never used. There was a gap, and then they started again.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, because kind of when people say, don't do any damage to these monuments. Many of these monuments were knocked down and rebuilt many times over millennia, as you say. So they weren't built like as static shrines. They were active, real parts of those communities. They were central to their lives, because going back to this thing about lineage again, they didn't have this line between life and death and past and future and present. There were no lines. The lineage, the movement between the ancestors and the future and your death was unbroken. It wasn't, there wasn't anything broken. And I noticed a lovely phrase used by John O'Donoghue about the past, that death is just a veil. You just pass through the veil, and our ancestors are the other side of that veil. We're this side. You just move from one side to the other, and that sense of where we are now, as distinct from where we were 10,000 years ago, it's the same place. It's a continuum, and the future is as much real as the past. So it's a matter of just not thinking that we're on this line. Get rid of this line. It's not a line.
Go around in circles. Liz says, not to put a downer on things, but we likely leave out microplastic behind. It would be a good way to track our ancestor cohort. Gabriella says, we have different opportunities today to leave a mark and leave things behind, such as creating a kinder society, a gentler, more diverse society with equal rights for all humans, plants and animals. And she says, it doesn't have to be a stone monument. We can leave our mark in another way. Geraldine says, we evolved into lines. And Pat says, there used to be a lot more monuments than we have now after the famine, especially up here in the north. She's in Ulster. There was a conscious effort to wipe out what was left of the old Gaelic culture. So many dolmens and stones were toppled around my way in the years directly after the famine. The ones that remain are a gateway to the old world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very true, and I did say it earlier. In many ways, we were lucky, using that term carefully, that Christianity for us didn't do the destruction that was done in other places. and that leaves a little bit still around. But the question of how we leave things behind is important. Murray, I do think we can leave that connection we have with each other and what's important. That very much can be done, and the stones which have been there, again making that point about why ancient societies created these can certainly be seen and studied, even though they have been destroyed. But I do always say that pagans, and I know not everyone in the Druid community is a pagan, but for me, the greatest piece of research and information you can do is every pagan should know Christianity inside out, because that's where their history is. There's no one else wrote it, so so you have to, whether you see it as the wheel of the year. How is the wheel of the year depicted in Christianity? We all know it's there, but in looking at the history of how they done it, it's really important, because in there are the layers of truth of our own history.
I think I don't know if I wouldn't say it's through Christianity, however, but it looks at the records, the writings in the ancient manuscripts by the early monks, because they talk about the fire festivals. And then you look at the landscape with the stone monuments, and you can actually see a calendar. Although they didn't talk, there was no mention of the eightfold wheel there until Gerard Gardner and Ross Nichols, in the 50s. But a beautiful synthesis. We're coming to the end of our time. And Franklin says, songs travel for ages, and they can transmit the spirit in a very direct way. And I think storytelling, not losing an oral tradition, things can be passed on.
Definitely.
From one mouth to ears and so on and so forth. That it's not just about having everything digital, but it's actually oral telling, having conversations just like what we're having now, but also songs, stories, I think are really, really important.
And as we can see, when people said that books, and particularly children's books, would die out with technology, the very opposite has happened, and the writing of stories and myth and legend in all countries and all cultures are important. And we don't have to get hung up on where truth is in terms of myth and legend. It's that they're part of the whole colour of what makes up our history, and they're vital. And nowhere is as vital as telling them in person, in the storytelling, which you're involved in, Eimear. But I mean, you know how big the storytelling festivals are. Many parts of the world, not just in this part, but in many parts of the world, how colourful and important it is. And in all the old Irish tales, it was through poetry that kings were brought down and brought into order, that the Fili or the Druid came to the court. He said a poem, but the poem could bring down the crown. And many times, and that's the way wisdom was portrayed, both in terms of the laws of the time and justice, perhaps, as well, and wisdom was done through poetry and storytelling. And the rulers of society listened very carefully to the storyteller, because in that was a warning or a praise, but it was definitely never dull.
And indeed, and your poem, in its terms, Anna has animated those carvings, that rock art. So, and it's things like that. So making sense of, it's your interpretation. And the thing about stories is or the myths, they don't contain facts, but they do contain truths.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it's about finding truth everywhere, finding it in the landscape, finding it in a poem, a story, a made-up story. I don't know if there's any culture that doesn't like stories. People love stories, and the more of them are told, the better. Now, my final questions. 2 questions I ask everybody. What is your favorite season in the year, and what is your favorite ceremony to mark the wheel of the year?
Well, I'm probably because I'm a Sagittarian, but I mean, I am opposite to most people. My favorite time is from the autumn equinox to Yule. That's my
Okay.
that's my absolute favorite time, and my favorite ritual, without doubt, is Samhain. That's my time.
Okay, Gabriella, you got one right. So she said Samhain and summer. Gabriella always every week votes, guesses, bets, but her success rate is mixed. So anyway, she's 50-50 this week, which is wonderful. Michael, it's been such a joy. Sorry about for everybody, the technical difficulties earlier. And I always appreciate the audience stay. They don't lose faith in the process. So I appreciate that. So thank you, Michael. I really, really enjoyed our chat. And
Thank you very much.
so I let you say good night to everybody. And then you can go backstage and then we'll chat over the comments afterwards. Don't go away.
Okay, well, thanks very much to everyone, and it really was a great, great pleasure being with you this evening, Eimear. Thank you very much, everyone. Lovely being here.
I'll chat to you soon. So listen, thanks again for coming this evening and joining in with your comments. And again, as usual, I don't get to read all of them, so that's not that I'm ignoring you, but I really, really appreciate your contribution to these conversations. So I wish you a pleasant evening, afternoon, morning, or if you're watching a recording of this chat, until we meet again next week. And until then, slán go fóill. Take care.